The title of this video could have been any number of things, such as, why is this called Pro? It's not very pro at all, and it's not so great, or a great value for the money, perhaps the best screen you can get on a laptop for $200. I might even say, it's better than nothing, or it feels nice. Perhaps most importantly, reading is important. I should start out by saying that I was using this system for several days before I decided I needed to read the manual. So, as this review goes on, I'll point out what was corrected by updates and what wasn't. I have to say that when I found this update utility that is in the bottom right-hand corner, I mistakenly thought that it was just launching the terminal because I didn't actually read anything. So, reading is important. And for the sake of brevity, I'll say that after I did a little reading, this is where the problems start. So after I updated to kernel 4.4.210, I went to the GitHub page for Mr. Fix IT 201, who seems to be the primary maintainer of this specific Debian distro, along with one other. I found that there were only notes for 4.4.207. So much for reading the manual. Despite the update, I can't connect to 5 GHz Wi-Fi. I thought that this was a hardware issue perhaps, since there is another hardware issue with the system, which we will get to. But, spoiler alert, I installed Manjaro ARM on this system, and it sees the 5 GHz Wi-Fi just fine, and it connects to hidden Wi-Fi networks just fine. So it's not a hardware issue. Initially, Bluetooth mouse movement was jerky, like 10 frames per second. This was fixed with the update, so the Bluetooth is great. Before and after the update, it never had any connection issues, so at least the Bluetooth gets good marks. Not being happy with the default rock profile, I created a new user profile. Creating a new user has a totally different looking desktop environment, although it is still Mate. It's just not the default out-of-box experience. It's more of the traditional Mate desktop, while the out-of-box experience is a slightly customized version in terms of appearance. One thing I noticed that's very odd is that the new user doesn't allow for the maximum 2 GHz CPU frequency. It only goes to 1.5 GHz. Looking at the hardware, it looks like the alternate profile at full power can only access the 4 little cores of the CPU, so the rock profile can access the 2 big cores, which gives the primary profile 30% faster but 50% fewer processing threads. Take that as you will. Before the update, Chromium opens under the default rock profile but doesn't actually navigate anywhere. With the 4.4.210 update, this did correct that behavior, so good, I guess. Firefox doesn't open at all under a new user. The process starts. It's just that no UI ever shows up. I removed Firefox to see if an uninstall and reinstall would fix it, and now I can't seem to get it reinstalled. This was fixed with the 4.4.210 update. Both Chrome and Firefox after the fact function as expected. Another little oddity along with that was that the settings of Chromium wouldn't open. I'm not sure if that's exclusively a Pinebook issue or just some oddity of Chromium running on an ARM CPU. It also seems fixed after 4.4.210. There's also this annoying thing where I ordered the US keyboard layout, but the default keyboard on the system is English UK. It doesn't take much effort to fix it, and the problem is that when I created the password for the new user account, thinking it was a US layout, not the UK, so my passwords didn't line up after I flipped the keyboard around. So the same key combinations obviously weren't producing the same characters. The speakers of the system are tinny, but what can you expect from a pair of 2-watt speakers? The peaks on these are painful, especially for female voices. The speakers are downward facing, so if being used on your lap, this will make the audio worse. However, the speakers are on the curved underside of the edges, so they play out to the sides a little bit, which is perfectly fine if you're sitting it on a desk or other flat surface. This was partly corrected with the update, which many people online said it would be, and the sound quality is much more balanced after the update. It's certainly noticeably louder, and it is overall much more enjoyable. Lap listening still isn't stellar, but that's a physics problem, not a Pine 64 problem. When closing the lid of the system and opening it back up, it seems that the screen doesn't lock and the audio doesn't work. I tried adjusting volume, reloading web pages, changing audio sources and settings. Nothing worked except a system reboot. Also, something fixed with the update. At least the audio is fixed. The screen lock is not. It doesn't seem to be an option in the settings either. Maybe there's something I'm missing, but I couldn't ever find anything that acted like it would lock the screen unless you actually just log off the system entirely. But speaking of reboots, occasionally this system just turns off and turns back on. I haven't found any consistency as to why, and there's no logs that seem to help identify the issue, just that it happened several times. Initially, I had thought that the 4.4.210 update had fixed this behavior, but it still occurs, 2 times before the update and 2 times after the update. During my couple-week-long adventure with the system, there was a point where I was trying to sort out some odd issues with Firefox's behavior. I uninstalled Firefox, but could never get it reinstalled. With the help of a Linux friend, we discovered that many of the removed dependencies that were deleted with Firefox came from the Debian SID distro, an unstable set of packages that is accessible if you know where to look. Per Debian's own description on the site, SID is subject to massive changes and in-place library updates. This can result in a very unstable system, which contains packages that cannot be installed due to missing libraries, dependencies that cannot be fulfilled, etc. Use at your own risk. To add more confusion to this, if you install neofetch, the command even says it's Debian GNU Linux 9.11 strech arch64. So, when the installed packages are by and large ARM HF variants, this creates a problem, not ARM64. And this is certainly not an Arch distro. Firefox was installed after the 4.4.210 update, and the Firefox reinstall after the update could be considered good or bad, depending on if you want software to be reinstalled or not. For example, if I didn't want Firefox at all, after doing an update and seeing it installed again, you could consider this a detractor. Webcam performance is quite poor. At 1280 by 720, the video is passable, but it's not stellar. At its maximum resolution of 1600 by 1200, the video runs at maybe 1 frame per second. At either resolution, there is no audio. I didn't bother trying to record separate audio. I'll never use this system for recording podcasts or videos, and I don't recommend that you do so either. So we haven't really gotten into battery life of the system, which is possibly a great part of it. Its battery is difficult to find fault with. The charge from the battery at the factory lasted me a little over 8 hours of general on and off usage. It still reported nearly 2 hours of additional runtime. I spent most of the day watching YouTube and writing in Google Docs, some listening to an audiobook from Audible, and just kind of general web browsing. Again, this was off and on, not sustained throughout the day. So on a whim, I decided to connect a USB-C cable to the charging port. When the battery was nearly dead, I decided to connect my MacBook's USB-C charger to it, and it began charging. At the time I wrote this, I have no idea what to make of it, because the actual power cord which comes with it, the DC charger, doesn't work at all. I've looked over the manual. This is an intended design to charge via USB-C, which I'm happy about. Call it a positive for redundancy. Obviously, the DC jack is not affected by the update, but I didn't expect it to since it's likely a hardware defect. When I put the battery under a more rigorous test, I let a YouTube playlist run at full screen. I only got a little over 3 hours on my initial run. To prevent YouTube from constantly stopping and buffering, I had to put it in performance mode, so the CPU was pegged at 2 GHz 100% of the time, and I still couldn't watch YouTube at 720p. Putting the CPU into on-demand mode simply makes 480p unwatchable, and I do have to say, however, at the time, this was using Chromium, I did not have H.264 added to get the hardware, the graphics decoding ability. So once I did that, and I set Chromium's settings for hardware acceleration, the performance was much different. Maxed out at 2 gigahertz, Chromium gave me 5 hours and 22 minutes of playback, while at 1.42 gigahertz, which is the highest that the system will go while still using the 4 optimized little cores, theoretically, I got 5 hours and 57 minutes, so we'll call it 6 hours. I decided to test how Firefox behaved in the same fashion, so I played through the same playlist on Firefox, and at 2 gigahertz got 5 hours and 47 minutes, so about 25 minutes longer. And at Firefox at 1.42 gigahertz, I got 6 hours and 6 minutes. So that comes right at 9 minutes longer than the Chromium test at the same CPU frequency. One thing I noticed, and this is just, it's an annoyance. I don't know that you would ever need to necessarily reduce the screen resolution. Maybe, I can't think of a use case. Maybe if you have a vision impairment, it would be useful. But you should know that the system can't be easily changed other than to go from 1080p down to 1024 by 768. So the screen, being the most standout part of this system, has to let real estate be wasted with black bars on both sides. If you go for a non-native resolution, at least, they're all 4:3 resolutions, not 16:9 like the native resolution is. This was not fixed by any updates, and Xrandr TAC S doesn't change the resolution either. It just gives you the same options. So I decided to do some benchmarking results. All tests were run with the CPU at the maximum frequency, and it connected to the USB-C charger to gain the best theoretical performance. For some CPU testing, I did lame MP3 encoding and the graphics magic tests from Phoronix. Lame MP3 encoding took 31.532 seconds. This is pretty respectable considering that a similarly priced Dell Inspiron that I reviewed previously on the channel took 72 seconds for that test. When it comes to graphics magic, all of the tests failed to run, so I have nothing to say for those. For the graphics tests, I tried to do Geeks Lab and I tried to do a couple others. All of those failed to run, so obviously they don't support the Mali GPU that is in here. For disk testing, I went with Flexible I/O Tester. I did a random read and a random write. I used the Linux AIO input setting. I used unbuffered. I did a direct write at 1 megabyte blocks. For the read, I got 158 megabytes per second with 155 IOPS. That's input-output operations. And at the write, I did 64.3 megabytes per second with 61 input-output operations. This is about on par with the Dell except for the write. The write speeds on the Dell 3180 came in at 103 megabytes per second or 99 IOPS. So Dell's integrated eMMC card is about 60% faster on writes. I did some memory testing as well with the Phoronix test suite. I ran T-Test 1 using 2 processor threads. Since the Dell only has 2 processor threads, I thought that this would be a more fair comparison, and I honestly thought the Pinebook Pro would come out on top, but I was mistaken. The Pinebook Pro completed the memory test in 61.657 seconds, while the Dell completed the same test in 28.23 seconds. I'm not sure if it's due to memory speed or memory configuration or what exactly, but it was an interesting result to be sure. So, all of that aside and updates aside, I still have some issues with this system. One is that man page commands don't work except for spacebar to move down the page. So if you run a man command to learn more about a command that is built into the terminal, no arrow keys, no mouse scrolling is available, just pressing spacebar. So if you accidentally spacebar past what you want, you have to exit and then rerun the command. CPU throttling under different user profiles, as mentioned at the beginning of this review, is disappointing. There's a strange power issue where the system still discharges despite being connected to power and shows as charging. I've got a 65 watt adapter hooked up. There's no way it's not getting enough power, and it does indeed charge. I can charge it up fully if it's powered off and then run it down fully. And once disconnected, it usually shows the actual charge on the system. So if the battery is not full and you disconnect the power cord and you connect it back, it will then show that the system is charging. It's not a deal breaker, but it is a gripe. There should be some refinement given to how this detects the AC adapter, at least the USB-C adapter. I have no idea how it works with the regular adapter. The aforementioned, it's not functional. And the performance on video. Heavy websites are just slow. Both Chromium and Firefox are slow-loading browsers on the system. Adding the additional overhead of any video streaming site just makes it all the more painful. Honestly, it's not terrible all of the time, though. Editing Google Docs via the web browser or locally via LibreOffice is just fine, so it's not a completely useless or terrible system. But I level this criticism against the Pinebook Pro. Its name is Pro, making you think it's for professionals, not enthusiasts. As a Pro product, this device falls woefully short. And let me clarify the descriptor of Pro. When I say that, I think of somebody like me, who is an enterprise-level sysadmin. I'm not talking about graphic designers, I'm not talking about programmers, I'm not an electrical engineer, so my experience doesn't pertain to any of those perspectives. And if you consider tinkerers and enthusiasts to be professionals, I'll politely disagree. I wouldn't even call this a consumer-ready device. And that might be where the problem is. It shouldn't be named the Pinebook Pro. It should be named the Pinebook Tinker, or the Pinebook 2, or maybe the Pinebook XL, but not Pro, as that has a certain level of polish and functionality associated with it. It works as a basic device, and that's about where it begins and where it ends, as a basic device. I get it, and I'm fond of saying, engineering is hard, but an almost 4-year-old CPU, we can't and we shouldn't expect a top-of-the-line performance, and we shouldn't be naming it Pro as a result. I also have to be honest here and level some criticism at us, the Linux community. I've seen no one criticize this product or device at all, other than to say that it doesn't game well. Of course it doesn't game well. It's an ARM CPU on a Mali GPU. So we are excited, and rightfully so, for a device that we control 100%. There's no backdoors, there's no telemetry, no corporate spyware. And these are all good and great things. That doesn't mean that we should let subpar functionality, performance, and general system inconsistency cloud our view. Wearing rose-colored glasses makes it more difficult to see the red flags, and there's a few of them. From everything I've read, the first Pinebook was a good first step. This one here, the second one, is an improvement on that. But we're a long way from talking about a daily driver, at least for me. To the Linux community at large, I've seen no criticism of this device. Are we, as a community, blind to the other issues this system has due to it being so floss-friendly? Is this the best that floss enthusiasts can do? Or is it that we're accepting this because floss isn't as established as proprietary systems and companies? Even if that were the case, do we not criticize these devices or their software when they fall short? Don't get me wrong, I'm excited that somebody like Mr. Fix IT 201 can do such great work so far with what has been done. And there's other distros that I'm sure have done a lot of great things on this system as well. I plan on testing out Manjaro and Gentoo. But that doesn't mean objectively we look at it and we go, oh, there's nothing wrong here. Everything's great. No, there's still a lot of work to be done. And we need to be honest and say that. So, with my couple weeks with the Pinebook Pro coming to an end, I'm going to look at putting those other distros on this hardware. I think I'm going to start with Manjaro, test that out for a while. Gentoo will be sometime after that. I've even thought about putting a cheap NVMe drive in there to replace the eMMC. As I understand it, the boot order, I think, has the oh my gosh, what is this? NVMe, sorry, the solid state drive. Apparently it has that set as a higher priority than the eMMC does. So hopefully I can put something on there and test it out. I'm not completely and utterly convinced the Pinebook Pro is a terrible product. It just needs a lot of work from the software side, I think. So maybe changing the software is the key to getting it to operate better. I don't know. But I plan on testing it in the coming weeks under these different distros, and I plan on copying the distros to the internal storage, either the eMMC, or if I get an NVMe drive, then that's what I'll do there. And I plan to use them at length, not simply loading a distro on an SD card. You know, a lot of people out there have done like, oh, I've loaded whatever on my micro SD card, and it works great considering that it only does 40 megabytes a second reads. I'm not doing that. I want to actually test it at length and see what we can get out of it. So I will, of course, let you all know how this works out. But I'm anticipating a nightmare. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this. I know the ending was not quite as positive as some of my other videos have been, but I wanted to be honest about what I'm seeing. Hey all, so this is kind of an impromptu add-on because I had some additional thoughts as I was exporting the final video here, what was going to be the final video. And I feel like perhaps maybe I've been too harsh or unclear, and I just want to be sure that I'm getting across the point that the Pinebook Pro is just not a consumer-ready device. It's great for tinkerers, it's great for enthusiasts, it's really good for floss in general, I would say, and really, really takes those hardware steps necessary to ensure our privacy as individuals. So I wanted to make clear that if I'm being harsh on it, it's because I don't think that it's ready for the mass market. That's not to say that it has no market at all. It's just that it's got some refinements that are needed. The hard work that people like Mr. Fix IT 201 or AUFan, who does the Gen 2 ARM distro for this device, I've put a ton of work, and everybody at Manjaro and all the other different enthusiast distros that are out there, people who do this because it's either their job or it's their passion or hobby or all three. And I want to make sure that I'm not insulting any of you or any of you who think that you are fans of that kind of work or who aspire to that kind of work. So like I said, it's just I wanted to be sure that I was being clear on what exactly I'm criticizing. I think my criticisms of the device are valid. I think that there are a lot of necessary steps that we haven't made yet, but that's not to say that they won't come. Obviously, I talked about how the one system update improved many of the issues. So with time, these can only get better, and I want to make sure that y'all understand that as well. It's not necessarily ready to go to market right now, or some kind of device like it is not necessarily ready, but that doesn't mean that it will never be. So keep working on it, keep doing a good job. I know that your passion for this community goes far and wide, so does mine. I want to see Linux in a larger area. I want to see it more throughout the markets. I want us all to have the right to control our own systems as we see fit, and there are too few people working on it, certainly. So again, I don't want my criticisms to be insults to those people who have put so much time and effort into these things. Their work is appreciated. I hope that they continue to work on them, and I hope that all of you will continue to support them in their efforts. So with that being said, thank you and have a good day.